In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. There are a number of thoughts that raise themselves on an occasion like this, and I would just very briefly wish to comment on what might be called one of the special distinctions of our good celebrant of today, which has to do with the fact that music, sound, is an important part of the celebration of the Holy Eucharist when it can be arranged. And so our good celebrant today is a musicologist by profession, and he has been working whenever he could, and I used to have meetings with him, usually in the since deceased Hungarian restaurant, about how we can possibly restore the Gregorian or semi-Gregorian format of what in Latin is called the Missa Cantata, the song mass. And we discussed it back and forth, and as you can see that even when there is no accompanying musician present, he is able to bring that forth, as it were, as he has even today. And of course our ultimate objective is that we restore the English form of the Missa Cantata to the entirety of our Sunday Mass, but these things are not that easy. But if there is anyone among us at the present time who has both the motivation and the talent, or three times, the motivation, the talent, and the training to bring this forth in our midst, it is our good celebrant, or good priest of today, for which we are eternally grateful. And who knows, maybe with my Hungarian upbringing on goulash and things like that, maybe I'll last long enough that I can be here when it is performed. Because that is really the Missa Cantata, which just means the song mass, is the one recommended from ancient times on for the Sunday Mass. But of course there can be difficulties, and even today we were expecting a musical accompaniment, and then the lady musician who has been here before didn't make it. But you can, those of you who know her, you can tell her that in great secrecy I shall hide away the little honorarium that we have reserved for her music before, and it'll be here that when she comes, she says, "All right, now you perform." See. Anyway, but she's a very darling lady, and to maybe come to more general considerations. What we need to keep in mind that clear back to the Old Testament, to King David, who is often portrayed with the harp. What is he doing? He's making music. And of course the Psalms, David, see there is a thing of the King David and King Solomon led merry lives with their many concubines and many wives. But when they both got older, then Solomon wrote the Proverbs, and David wrote the Psalms. So that they were musically oriented people clear back in the Old Testament, and that this is very important. It's very important in an even more general sense, which means that beauty, which is of course the soul of music, is a very important thing. And when possible, then that beauty should become part of the ways in which we address the Almighty power. And that is, again, when possible. I don't mean that we want all kinds of untrained and unprepared people croaking away in the church, but that the cultivation of beauty in connection with the service of the Blessed Sacrament is very important. Having been raised in the Roman Catholic Church in the monastic order much of the time, I am very aware of that as to how much, especially a trained musical setting for the services, and especially, primarily of course, the Holy Eucharist, but also the benediction of the Most Holy Sacrament, which is the poem written by Saint Thomas Aquinas, our dear friend throughout the ages, the one who was referred to in our order as the Holy Count of Roccasecca, because that is what he was. He was from the knightly family of the Counts of Roccasecca, and that gave him a certain amount of trouble, because although he had a whole bevy of brothers, his father didn't like the fact that Thomas became a monk, and so they made war on the monastery, not a very religious act right there. And so all of his brothers and their retainers attacked the monastery, and down in the cellar, hidden away behind hopefully a good barrel of Apennine wine, there was Brother Thomas Aquinas. And so I think they dragged him home to the ancestral castle, but then he just wasn't happy and he didn't cooperate with his father at home. So they said, all right, go to the doggone monastery. And what happened was that his father and a majority of his brothers, and he had quite a few brothers, they all became monks in the same monastery after a while. So that's a great compliment right there. They're Dominican monks, by the way. So let's keep in mind that and of course his poems, which he composed, and to which he added musical notes, became a very great treasure house of ritual, and particularly of anything having to do with the Blessed Sacrament. And if you come here, as more you should perhaps, on the fourth Sunday of the month in the evening, then you can see it performed, and the great hymn that is intoned during the procession is the composition and the poem written by Brother Thomas Aquinas, the Tantum Ergo Sacramentum, which testifies to his tremendous devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. Now, but of course, if we go especially to the places where the popular spirit, the popular sentiment was always turned to a major extent to beauty, then go to Italy and go to Rome, and you will see as to how beauty can be combined with devotion and with our in releasing our innate desire to sing the praises of Almighty God. It's very important, very beautiful. Similarly, in the visual arts, that is the place of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci and the greatest of the Renaissance painters, because of course there we have the visual aspect of the transcendence and of the divine. And then more or less around the same time also came into use the Gregorian chant, which was then sort of mixed with the other chants, but which is particularly in monastic Christendom, in the Western Rite, still of very great importance, and truly can contribute to upraising the individual. And so now I'm using all of this longer introduction here to indicate that these considerations were present even at the time when more of the Eucharist came to be translated into English way before the Vatican Council, Mathematical Council. That's not where it came to pass. But for instance, one of the very first ecclesiastical bodies that in the past century broke away from Rome, but only not in spirit, but only in some forms. The Liberal Catholic Church, of which I had many good friends, both in the clergy and in the episcopate, they all were looking for something beautiful, headed by their first presiding bishop, James Ingle Wedgwood, who himself was very fond of music and wrote his doctor's dissertation at the University of Paris by the liturgy of the Mass and of Gregorian, and of the building of organs to accompany church music. Very, very interesting gentleman whom it hasn't been my good fortune to know, but I knew many people who were associated with him, and I remember a lady whose name I can't remember. How about that? Who was a very famous journalist in my second capital city in Vienna, and she finally came over here. Her daughter was a physician at the Kaiser Hospital, and she came here to live and was a member of this lodge. And so I remember she said that Wedgwood with his music was the one still missing factor when he died, and that it would be very important to have as beautiful a musical setting for the various rituals, particularly in the Holy Eucharist. She also became quite a good friend of my mother's. Here is the Austrian and the Hungarian, and I remember when that sort of indicates when my mother arrived here, this lady was already here, and so we had rounded up a Hungarian singer who had come here also as the result of the Hungarian uprising in '56. And so I was begging him practically on my knees in Hungarian, my dear, dear, dear compatriot, please sing for us the Hungarian national anthem. And he said, well, you know, that's a prayer. Oh, but you know, we do pray in this place also. Oh, really? Which shows you that the theosophical setting has to be remembered in various contexts, and the theosophists are not atheists, and therefore these things are important. So the compatriot finally had himself persuaded, and he got up to the piano, which we already had, and he was playing the piano and singing the anthem. And there were two people in the fairly large lodge that we had at that time, who both were standing and who both had their tears running. And they were my mother and the Austrian journalist lady. So let's say we have made our various contributions to what since then has to come as the result of our prayers and meditations, the freedom of our beloved country, my beloved native country. But you see, there also, you hear even if you are not very musically inclined, if a Hungarian hears the national anthem, you stand up and you participate, because the adding of the dimension of beauty to what else one may be doing is always a valuable addition. And this is true, of course, of music, this is true of the arts like painting and other visual arts and so forth, that somehow the presence of beauty does act as at least a partial presence of God. So we have not only the real presence, the miracle at the altar, but we also have, when we can, the presence of the divine in beauty. Look at those beautiful windows that we had installed here after the Theosophical Society bought this building by one of the last great, what would you call them, stained glass artist, who was a German, who came here as the result of the great tragedy of his family that he suffered during the war. A very, very nice gentleman. And we were able to pay for it because at the same time there was donated to us a little piece of real estate right up the road, the next street that goes up, and all about the revenue, as the British would put it, of that real estate. We were able to pay the German artist, who since then, of course, has gone to Valhalla himself. Very, very nice gentleman. And then just very recently, I think probably a couple of years ago at the most, I had a phone call, and the phone call changed into German, and they said that she was the daughter of the artist who made these stained glass windows, and that they are here with their sisters and brothers and cousins, not the wife and the daughter of the poor man anymore, because they committed suicide when they learned that the Russians were coming to Berlin, where they were living, which was not an unusual event. One uncle of mine did similarly to the unhappiness of the Catholic clergy. But let us say the issue that beauty of the arts, or the arts of beauty, should be brought into close conjunction with the ecclesiastical matters, and that in so doing they will improve, they will add another dimension, and that this is really quite important. But of course you are also dealing with countries where in the Vienna Philharmonic and the great Vienna choirs are all very active at Christmas time, and where the arts have been cultivated for a very long time. So let us then be very grateful that in this turbulent world, one person has found himself to us who is dedicated to that, and who through all these years, in addition to his secular occupation, has been working on the restoration of the Holy Eucharist Mass, the Missa Cantata, to its original beauty, and who is still working on it. And since his age is considerably younger than mine, I have some hope that he will complete it, and that whether I'll be here in the spirit or whether I'll be here physically, that I will see our Missa Cantata completely restored. You had some partial restoration of it, it's a lot more responses and a lot more musical parts. And so let us keep that in mind too, especially in a world where technical perfection is worshipped, but where real beauty is not particularly worshipped. And once again, I tend to blame everything on communism. Why? Because I have suffered under it so much. And therefore I think those of us who have done so have a certain justification for that. So that, for instance, I remember more than one, but particularly one gentleman who worked at PRS, from a very good family and a very learned man, who went on a trip to the Soviet Union. And I told him over coffee, I said, why do you want to go there? Well, he says, because Dante went down to hell also. And I said, good, that's the right attitude. In any event, when he came back, he said, well, what was your impression in Moscow and St. Peter? They didn't dare call it St. Petersburg yet at that time, but it is now once again Leningrad. In any event, he said, what I saw both in the big cities was just gray. Gray buildings, gray people, a gray atmosphere, very depressing. I said, you know what, you know and I know that that's not going to stay like that. And by God, it didn't stay. So, and if you, oh my goodness, the time is late. But I also, another observation around the same time came to me from Mrs. Emily Selam, who was a very prominent theosophist and a very learned woman, and I rode in about an hour bus ride with her from the Chicago airport to Wisconsin, and she had just come back also from a trip to Russia. And so I said, well, Emily, how do you like? He said, the only place that I liked were the old buildings in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. And he said, and the feeling I had, the quiet streets of the beautiful old Baroque buildings. And he says that I had a distinct impression that they were talking and they were saying that we are going to come back. And a few years later, they did. And it's not finished. I have friends who are going to Russia very frequently. So keep in mind that the beautiful things, for going clear back to the pharaohs or to Mesopotamia, that were built beautifully according to their own style, in various ways they are coming back, because the desire for beauty is a very important faculty of the human soul, and that therefore it is very worthwhile to have it combined with spiritual things. Now that was a long roundabout sermonette here, but let's say wherever you go, to India, to Tibet, where you cannot go for various reasons, and others, you will see that beauty came to be combined with religion, and that the spiritual and the beautiful are together, and that together they will actually once again redeem and transfuse the world as they once did and as they again can. So let's keep those things right, and let us be grateful that our good priest who has been working on this for so many years. Of course, I have a little connection with it too, because prior to him coming to us into the clergy, I was closely associated, because I was married to her, to a lady who was a musician, and she's no longer here. And we parted actually, but we also parted in death. She's buried in a cemetery in Arizona. But prior to that, lived for a great many years in France. And as soon as she got back from France to the United States, she passed into the other world. But what was one of her great projects? To restore a Gregorian tune to the Mass. And she did not have the time to do so anymore because she was working in France. But anyway, a lot of people had that the beautiful, the exalted in art, in music, needs to be restored, and that it's let's say the Novus Ordo has not contributed to that restoration of beauty at all. So go to Rome and tell it to the present Pope. Of course, he had nothing to do with it, the poor fellow. This was much earlier. But beauty with together with the desire for and the devotion to the divine is a very, very wonderful and a very important thing. And let's keep that in mind too, that that feature might be returned to more churches than it is at the present time. And so may the mystery of that which hangs twixt heaven and earth descend upon us and remain with us always. keep in mind also that Wednesday, when they always have Eucharist anyway, is Ash Wednesday. So if you like to have that little piece of ash, as we used to say, well, that's when we go and make an ash out of ourselves. You know, that's just sort of seminarian talk. But anyway, keep it in mind that will be done on Wednesday, and then maybe some of it repeated the following Sunday. And thank you so very much, my dear friend of many years, and my brother priest, for having so beautifully celebrated the Eucharist for us.